Yeah. Yeah. I've been dealing with the best I can. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
It makes it, I appreciate your comment because we adopted a son and he is an FASD crack addict. And his issue is with his birth mother. So we've done all the counseling, we've done all the healing work that we can do, but we're living with a ghost because she won't.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a difficult situation. It's kind of like you take it so far and then you have to get to that point where you have to let go.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
But it's like living with a ghost because you don't want to blame somebody.
Why partners and family members struggle so much with healthy emotional detachment. And a lot of people, particularly when I'm working in family programs and so forth, and they'll say, yeah, great, that sounds good, I'm going to focus on myself, but then when you actually start putting that into action, then they start to panic, and it's like, yeah, I don't know if I really like this very much. And when they actually start to do the work. And some of the reasons for that is before, when they're in this kind of over-functioning parent mode, and the person who is in the addiction is kind of reduced to this tantruming little kind of child and so forth, they aren't necessarily happy, not necessarily feeling like they're thriving or healthy and so forth, but there are some payoffs in that it's a safe, familiar cycle. So what a lot of partners and family members have said to me is, well, what am I going to do if he gets better? Or partners will say, she might outgrow me. And then what am I going to do? Because part of their roles have been to function best when somebody else is weak. Also, the payoff is to be in control so that if I'm in control of the finances, I'm in control of everything, then you can't hurt me. There's also this part of this payoff also is what a few of you were talking about, is this ability to be right all the time. I'm always right and you're always wrong, and I can escape my personal issues and so forth by pointing to you all of the time. And you can kind of become my scapegoat in life. Another payoff to some of these frozen cycles is this ability to be needed. So the rescuer gets to be needed. So at least you need me. When you're calling me at 3 o'clock in the morning, when you're struggling and things are completely blowing up and out of control, at least you need me. And so you'll see this happen, particularly in the family work that I do, where you'll have two parents who are in a relationship, who are in a marriage, and there's kind of like this emotional distance and wedge. And then mom has aligned, because I work at a male treatment center currently, mom has aligned with son, and son is kind of like the confidant, and dad's very emotionally distant and not really part of everything, and mom makes the decisions. And so when we start doing this family work in a family program and start unpacking some of these issues and dynamics, it's like, well, I got to let him go, and I don't know if I really like that. And so mothers will even say to me, at least, I know that I shouldn't be giving him the money for rent, but I know I shouldn't, but kind of there's this like feeling inside of me, and it's kind of like this little pang or something, and it's like I just can't help myself. And it's like, and then when mother got real about it, she said, well, it's kind of like how we bond or how we connect. At least he kind of needs me, and I kind of like that, because at least I'm needed, because my husband doesn't even need me. He's always working all the time. So, and I'll say, so I said to this one wife, I said, well, you need a pug named Fifi. Fifi will need you. Fifi will love you unconditionally. She already had one who slept in the bed right in between her and the husband. The husband said, Cathy, don't even go there. I don't even want to talk about the dog. So, except it was an Irish setter. So, not Fifi. So, and the earn back trust plan is a way that I can be in control of everything without everything falling apart. When I'm rescuing and caregiving, another part of that is that even I'm rescuing and caregiving for you, but it helps me to not have to look at my fears of abandonment or rejection. Because if I'm in a power role over you, and I'm in control of the finances and so forth, then you're dependent on me. And you're dependent on me making decisions. And if I'm rescuing you from all of these problems and so forth, then you can't really walk out on me. If you're emotionally dependent on me, you're financially dependent on me, and so forth, then you can't walk out on me. And so what happens in some families and some partnerships then is that we end up being like we are following these roles. And it's like our relationship becomes scripted. And it's like I come in and you're always the one in trouble and I'm bailing you out of trouble and so forth. And, you know, talking with some partners, and I know some partners will say to me, I'm thinking one partner in particular, she says, you know, I'm $35,000 in debt. I can't stop myself. I just keep giving him money. I love him. I love him like I've never loved anybody before. He just brings this soft spot out on me and out of me. And what it is it's just this contracted role where he's in this role of being a taker, getting this money and so forth, and then plays the role of, you know, I love you and I would never be anything without you. And look at how far I've progressed in life because of you. And then she just keeps sending out the money and money and money and so forth. And then her friends and support network say, well, what are you doing? And she's just like, well, I can't really help myself. And, you know, you can't help who you love. And so it becomes kind of shrouded in this kind of, you can't help who you love, and love kind of takes over your heart, and this romanticized kind of love. But underneath that, when you unpack it, it's this rescuing and caretaking because of this incredibly stuck need to be needed and to have somebody dependent. And if they're dependent on you, then they can't walk out on you. And then, so that's why in so many cases, a lot of people will go on to their third or their fourth or their fifth relationship of that kind and lose money and be taken advantage of. And they'll say, I just don't know how this happens. It's like I've got a tattoo across my forehead that says, come take advantage of me. And so, but then I talk about, you know, radar and so forth. So when you're meeting somebody, it's like the giver has giver radar or rescuing radar. So they'll kind of go into social situations and somebody will say, I have this problem. The taker will talk about, you know, I have this problem. And the giver's radar goes off. Well, how can I help you? You know, oh, wow, that's so terrible. And, oh, you know, I'll help you with this. And then they say, you know, after the fourth, fifth relationship, how does this keep happening to me? And the taker just takes, and takes. Because the taker gets their self-esteem by how much they can get from people. So get, and that increases my self-esteem. And then the giver's self-esteem rises by how much they're needed, so that they're actually hiding behind these behaviors of because they get to be good, they get to be right, and they get to be a victim and taken advantage of because they're hiding behind their giving behaviors. So when you start unpacking a lot of this stuff, there's often fears of abandonment, fears of rejection, fears of intimacy. So this idea that if I really share with you who I really am as a person, so as Cathy, who I am, if I share with you like who Cathy really is, without hiding behind all these behaviors of giving money to you and doing this and doing, then you're not going to accept me, you're going to reject me and walk out of my life. So I can kind of hook you into my life by always giving to you. And not only giving to you and making it so comfortable for you, but then I can get you to, I can kind of foster a dependency so that you need me to function. And I'm thinking of an example of a client that I worked with, and he said, you know, Cathy, come here quick. I want you to come meet my girlfriend, Michelle. And I said, oh, hi, Michelle. And he says, you know, Michelle, she knows me like nobody does. He says, you know what, Cathy, I'm a certifiable nut bar. But Michelle, she understands me. And when you could see Michelle's kind of shoulders go back and go, yeah, I understand the nut bar. And it was kind of like this bizarre interaction, but it was like he had this whole story that he created for himself, like this whole bad boy kind of image of I'm just like this like kind of wanderer in life and nobody can tame me, but Michelle over here, she can bring out the best in me. Well, Michelle's supporting him. Of course she can. She's providing him with his rent. She's providing him with her car to drive around everywhere. And, in this whole kind of fix-it project mentality, like take the penny and kind of rub the penny and he'll become a better kind of person. And it's like she's teaching him how to talk properly and socially interact as if he's like at some social impairment. And meanwhile, he's just lining his pockets, and then he'll go off and find another Michelle. And the cycle continues on and on and on and on. So it's really important when you start unpacking those behaviors, and people are saying, I don't understand. I'm on the relationship with my third alcoholic. How did this? I think God just wants to hook me up with alcoholics all the time. And so that you can start looking and seeing at a lot of these underlying patterns. Some of the payoffs and why families get stuck in their cycles, particularly when you see this with parents, is that parents who were emotionally unavailable when the children were younger, or they were off working all the time, or whatever is happening, or they had a divorce earlier on in the children's lives, and later on they now have an adult child who's in treatment for addiction or not, then what happens is the parents will then try and satisfy this parental guilt. So it's like, I'll pay the money off, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this for you. And I see this happen quite often in family programs where the parent will be on the phone saying, I love my son so much, particularly because I work in a men's treatment center right now, and moms will call and say, I love my son. There's nobody who loves my son more than I do. So are you going to come to our family program? Oh, I couldn't possibly do that. I've got my charity event I've got to go to. I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to do that. But I love my son. And so, it's just really resolving. It's just kind of like, you know what? I'm guilty, and I feel guilty and unavailable, so I'll just buy you all the attention, and I'll just buy this for you, and somehow that's going to resolve things. Some people stay hooked into these family patterns and don't want to change because of martyrdom, and they get a lot of attention. So it's kind of like Betty comes in to work on Monday morning, and everybody's kind of sitting there waiting for the next installment of Betty's life story. It's like, what happened? Okay, we're around the water cooler, and there's Betty, and Betty says, okay, guys, I got a big one for you. What happened this weekend? And it's like this long story of like how she's been downtrodden by her husband or her son or whatever. And everyone's, ooh, wow, oh, amazing. And everybody kind of lives vicariously through Betty's life. And she gets to be the big martyr in life. And everybody go, oh, we're lucky we don't have a son like Betty's. Oh, and you see this at some Al-Anon meetings where so I always say to clients, go shopping for meetings, go meeting shopping, because some meetings are like a competition for who's the biggest victim in life. So they'll go to an Al-Anon meeting and it's like, I'm Mary, I was dragged through the mud, I was chained to the truck. And everybody's going, oh, I feel guilty to talk because I'm not as bad as Mary. And it's like this competition in martyrdom of like, people in recovery have war stories. People, family members have, the big capital V victim stories and it's a big competition. And so you can get sucked into that, getting a lot of negative attention for how bad your life is going. And you see that when you start to work with couples and families and things, they start to do this work. And so I was counseling a couple last week, and so my client says to me, he says, okay, I'm preparing for an anxiety attack right now. I'm going to work myself through this. I'm feeling horrible, and my life is crap. And I said, okay, so tell me about your week. He had between at least 15 to 25 good things that happened that week. So like everything, like work was going well, his relationship was going well, and so I looked at him and I said, okay, your life, if I kind of look at your life, it's getting better and you feel worse. Because that previous sessions you've been coming here and saying that you're feeling better, but your life is getting worse. So now your life is actually, like factually, do a Dr. Phil, like let's look at the facts. Factually, your life is getting better and you're feeling worse. And so it's that whole self-sabotage cycle that a lot of partners and family members and people in early recovery get into, that it's kind of like if things do start to go well, I don't know if I like that. You know, it's kind of like, okay, when's the other shoe going to drop? Or this is too good to be true. And then they'll often sabotage it and blow it up and ruin the new job they have or the new relationship they have and so forth. And when you look at another reason why these families get stuck into these cycles and don't want to change, this is the number one reason that I see, and I call it the irrational fear, is that remember that pattern that I showed you where the person is trying to rescue and manage and fix and control. The loved one is trying to do that over the person who's in active addiction. What happens with a lot of partners and family members is that they'll say, particularly if the person's not ready for treatment, or if it comes to that crunch time where they have to set a boundary, or they're going to have to start practicing what I was describing before, healthy emotional detachment, they'll say things like, well, I can't really do that. Or like, let's give the example of the person who's not ready for treatment, and now it's time to start setting boundaries. So before I gave you the example of the mother who has the 47-year-old son living in the basement, and she put the crack pipe on his lunch kit because she made him lunch and got it all ready for him, and then put his crack pipe on his lunch kit, said, okay, now he knows that I know, which did absolutely nothing, of course, and they just didn't talk about it now. And so it was time for her to start setting boundaries. And so I call myself a basement extractor person. I take 47-year-old sons out of their parents' basements and so forth. And I keep thinking of that cheese commercial. Stop feeding them cheese! So get your children out. But when it comes to that time of setting boundaries and working with families where the person isn't motivated to go to treatment, then the biggest block that partners and family members have is that they have what I call the irrational fear. The fear that if I set a boundary and I kick him out or her out or I tough love them, then they're going to die on the street. They're going to become a prostitute. They're going to, one of the biggest fears is they're going to fall so far into their addiction and become so depressed that they're going to give up on life. Everybody has given up on this person, and I'm the last one, and damn it, I'm not giving up on him. I'm not giving up on her. So I'm going to give the money to pay off the drug deals. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, because I am not giving up. And so with incredible stubbornness, saying I'm not going to give up. And so the fear, the irrational fear of this person's going to die, or this person and so forth, is going to be living on the street, stays and keeps these families stuck in these cycles so that the person doesn't become motivated. Because what is one of our number one motivators for change? Anybody think of what would possibly be one of our number one motivators for change? Especially if we don't want to change. Starts with a P. What I'm thinking of, the letter P. 4 letters? Yeah, somebody said it. We're pain. A lot of us will not change unless it's painful. When we don't want to change, it's when we experience pain that we actually start to change. And particularly for the person who is in active addiction and is self-destructing and they're going through that negative decline, and they're more and more increasingly negative things are happening to them, instead of letting them feel uncomfortable in their pain so that they might want to change, what a lot of partners and family members are doing is what I call the Charmin Ultra maneuver. And so have you seen that commercial, the Charmin Ultra commercial? The Charmin Ultra commercial is that tissue commercial, and the mother's walking down the aisle and she slides, and it goes in slow motion, and there's the little daughter on the side, and she goes, "Mommy!" in slow motion, and the mother falls like this, and then wonderful grocery clerk who's really on top of things, takes the Charmin Ultra tissue and goes down the aisle, and just as she lands, right on the Charmin Ultra, and everything's okay in the commercial. So what I talk about with families is doing the Charmin Ultra maneuver, where what they're doing is they're watching these negative consequences and the person falling in these negative consequences, and they're cushioning the consequence. And it's like, oh, it's okay. You know, you're going to be okay. Okay, how much do you owe them this time? $500? Okay, here we go. You know, let's go pay the dealer. And it's like, oh, then if you're in active addiction, you're in your self-centeredness and your negativity and so forth. It's like, all right, good times. I've opened up a new credit line with this dealer. It's like it doesn't even faze the person, but it's like soon as your life becomes uncomfortable, then you start to change in a lot of cases. And so remember the example of the wife that I was talking about who hired the private investigator. Her husband went into treatment. Can you guess why he went into treatment, or what happened before he went into treatment? I'll tell you, next installment. He actually went into treatment because she fired the private investigator and got together with the mother-in-law and stopped looking at him for 3 days. And so he went through 3 days, and he was like, okay, where's my investigator? And he's back in the Safeway parking lot smoking his pot, and there's nobody watching him. And he goes through day 1, and he's like, well, where's my audience? Nobody's watching me. And then by day three, he was ready for treatment because his audience that kind of kept him cushioned from going to treatment was gone. And they said, you know what? Here's the boundary. Your relationship is going to change with us unless you're prepared to go to treatment. And so they weren't prepared to be this kind of witness to this anymore. And so it's setting that really clear boundary. And that irrational fear will keep families in some of the most incredibly upsetting situations. So giving you an example of how many of you watch Intervention? So the very first episode of the show Intervention on A&E, and there was a lady, Allison. And Allison, she was into crystal meth and all kinds of things and so forth. Her father was dying, and he had an incredible safety box with a lock and so forth of all of his pills because she was stealing his pills, his pain medication. So he had to sleep at night with a key around his neck for fear that she was going to go in and start stealing his pain medication. And so what she would do then, she got frustrated having to try and break into the safe, so then she would jump on him and strangle him and wrestle with him and grab the key and then go into the safe and grab the pills out again. And what they were talking about that you didn't see on camera is that everybody was in fear of Allison. And so that Allison's sister confronted her and said, what are you doing? You're tearing this family apart, and it's totally and completely unacceptable. So Allison, being the happy person she was, chucked her sister down a flight of stairs and knocked her right down. So this whole family's living in terror of what Allison does. The irrational fear that kept the whole family stuck in the system was that the father said, I'm not sending my daughter out to be a whore on the streets. And so that was like the ultimate irrational fear with him, was that she was going to be a hooker. And that would just bring such incredible shame. So meanwhile, this family is being assaulted by this person who's completely got everybody in absolute terror because of this irrational fear. And when I say to family members also is that, and I kind of joke with them around this, is I'll say that, you know, you've been doing the Charmin Ultra maneuver so much that you've kind of make your family member a little sucky, so that they actually may not die on the street, and they may actually, once they start to experience this discomfort, may actually want to change. And so I remember in a treatment center that I worked at many years ago, and this client, he was mad. He was mad at me because I wasn't giving him attention because he said that somebody stole his jacket. And he said, well, that's it, I'm leaving. And I said, okay, well, that's your choice. And he says, well, now you're bringing the Hells Angels into this, Cathy. And now I'm getting mad. So I said, good, bring on the Hells Angels then. And so I never thought I'd ever say those words in my life, bring on the Hells Angels. But so he said, well, then I'm leaving. And I said, fine. So I opened the door for him. Then he walked up to the gas station on the corner, and he called about 5 minutes later and said, Cathy, can I come back? It's really scary out here. And so I said, yeah, okay, you can come back. We'll do a conflict res, and you'll be back in treatment and whatever. So he comes back in, and he's talking to the rest of them, and he goes, it's a scary world out there, guys. It's really scary. But I think of that about how, all the threats and the bravado and so forth, but when you actually set a boundary, that, we're not necessarily going into death and depression and so forth in the street, that, people can actually start to tap into their own resources and so forth. Any questions or comments at all?
Well, I think the one comment I have is, I'm the spouse of a recovering addict, and that death was a possibility, and I
Yes.
had to get to the point that I accepted that was a possibility, but that I still couldn't change that, and things had to get better. It had to get worse before they got better. But it wasn't, in my case, it wasn't an irrational.
Getting to a point in getting that internal strength in yourself where you say anything is better than the insanity of what we're dealing with at this point. And, God help us in whatever's going on, but, I can't live this way. And so if you're going to die, then I'm powerless over controlling that, but I refuse to live this way. And then you had your changes occur. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? The work that I do with families and starting to unpack some of these payoffs and unpack some of these patterns that they get stuck into is very courageous work to be able to say, you know what? I'm used to blaming him for the way my life is, and I've used him as my scapegoat all this time.
In actuality, she's more entrenched in her role than he is in his addiction.
Yeah.
So sometimes it actually acts opposite. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that's how you can see from where you take people out of their home environments and you take them through treatment and to plunk them back into their home environments without doing any of this work on families is so detrimental. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? Any questions about anything in general? So I kind of paced the presentation to having discussion in there as well. Something that I do that's been really effective. There's 2 exercises that I do that's been incredibly effective, and one of them is one that I call a dance. And what I do is I have partners or family members in the family program that I work in, and I get them to draw a day in the life of the person that they love who has an addiction or who's in recovery, but a typical day of what it was like. And I get them to map it in a flow chart. And so they'll map that along, I do this, and I do this, and I do this, and so forth. And it's really a very powerful exercise. And I get them to give a name to their dance. And then we share in a group what everybody's dance was like. And I've had a number of very powerful experiences, but one of the more powerful experiences I had is with this husband and wife couple, and they had their 24-year-old son in treatment, and they said, a typical day with our son, it was like we were treating him like he was mentally handicapped, like he had a special need of some kind. It's like our day started with going and waking him up and reminding him not to sleep through his alarm literally 15 times. So between 15 and 20 times, there they are shaking their son to get him up, to get him dressed, And then there's, dad shaking him to get him out of bed. There's mom running to the closet to get his clothes, to get them all together, and to get him into his clothes so that dad could kind of roll him into the van to get him to work, to kind of drop him off at work and so forth. And they said, and the mother just like broke down in tears, and she said, Cathy, we've been treating our son like he has a special need of some kind. And he's 24 years old and there's nothing wrong with him at all. And she said, we were terrified. We were so entrenched in this family pattern, she said, that we were terrified to take a vacation because who was going to take care of our son? We were also to the point where we want to retire in the next 4 years, and we were thinking, who's going to take care of our son when we die? Because somebody's got to wake him up in the morning, somebody's got to get his clothes, roll him out of bed. And I said, well, does your son have an intellectual deficiency of any kind? She said, no. He had straight A's in grade 12. There's nothing wrong with him at all. And I said, well, it's interesting. If you're thinking about different societies and when they send people off to war, like in Canada, how old does somebody have to be to join the army? And is it 19, or can they go in when they're 18? 18. So 18-year-olds can go into the army and they can hold AK-47s and they can drive tanks and blow up entire places when they're 18 years old, but your son, who has absolutely no intellectual deficiencies at all, can't roll his sorry little self out of bed to get to work. And they were in shock that that's what they were doing. And so there was this very powerful moment, because what I do in the family program as well is the last day I bring the clients into the family program. And what I do is I talk about the impact of addictions on relationships, and then we just open it up for discussion. So it's not a circular hot seat thing like they used to do in the 80s or whatever, and pointing, this is what you did to me in my addiction. It's nothing like that. It's opening up a large conversation around the impact of addiction so that you understand the healing journey of a person in early recovery, and the person in early recovery understands the healing journey of what is healthy emotional attachment. Why are you setting boundaries? Why are you doing these things? And this couple said, and this mother, and she broke down in tears again, she said to her son, you know what, son? I'm going to give you the gift of your adulthood back. And he just looked and just lost it and said, you know what? That's all I ever wanted. And it's just like this incredible change. We start getting all misty. So it's incredible. And some of the crazy rituals that family members get into, like I had another lady, family that I worked with, and her ritual was to get up in the morning and to run her hands along the counter to see if there's any cocaine residue, and go over and look into the keyboard of the computer and check for little particles of cocaine, because there might be some in there, and then to go over to the couch to see if her husband made it to work that day. And then that was her pattern, and if he was, then he was in a bad mood. So then she'd take her children, she had 3 children under the age of 4, and so she'd take them out in the yard and they'd play until he woke up out of his stupor. And this was her morning ritual of what she did every morning to see, because what he used to do was use cocaine on the kitchen counter, and then he'd go on the internet and the residue would go into the keyboards. Yes? You're dealing with actual brain damage, particular damage to the frontal lobe system, so that you don't have that short-term memory. And it's what's so frustrating, particularly with people who have organic brain injuries or people who have FASD and brain damage and so forth, is that you'll give them, as a child, you'll give them a timeout, then 15 minutes later they can't remember why they're in timeout. They get out of their timeout and then they go back and do exactly what they got into timeout to do. 3 minutes. Yeah, 3 minutes, yeah. So I think parents who adopt FASD kids really deserve a medal and a star, because it's taking on a huge... What's that? Yeah, that's a good goal. Yeah, it's difficult. You need an entire support team, and you need a really structured, organized schedule, and you need your psychiatrist on board and the teachers, and if you're dealing with a grown adult, it's an entire support team that does an entire individual education plan and life plan around how life is going to be.
Would you agree that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area?
Oh, incredible. definitely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
For example, the last Sunday, the headline in the paper was a 19-year-old who had two small children at home, was pregnant with twins, drowned in the river because they were drinking, and she decided to go for a swim because it was hot over.
Yeah, yeah. This is really building a support network for him and also a support network for yourself, because you can't lose your entire life and quality of life and everything. Yeah. Yeah. Questions or comments? We're wrapping up. Yeah, Wes.
One of the other things that
There's a cue for a lot of the couples that I work with, and I'll say, are we working like this or are we working like this together as a team? You know, are we tag team in life together or are we working against each other? And so one couple, we've got to such a finite level that they look at each other and they go like this, right? So, yeah.
or a lot of them they sort of say,
Yeah, that. Yeah. But, yeah, Wally.
Cathy, I think that's a good observation because I know I talked to a lot of people in early recovery coming out of the treatment center.
Yep.
I know something I hear a lot of the guys say is that they don't understand.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff. And to see those changes too. It's really, really incredible. Any other final comments or questions at all? Yes? Yeah. What I say to family members is a number of things. I explain to them that some people get it on the first try, some people don't get it on the first try, and some people will have a slip or have a lapse, and I explain what a slip or a lapse is. And then sometimes that slip scares them so much. It's kind of like, it's like the person who's in early recovery goes along and it's like they get into their addict thinking and they think, you know what, I've been clean so long, imagine if I got high, how high I can get. And that thought just like slips right in there. And it's kind of like, I could describe it as kind of the person who's been on a diet but has created a whole new lifestyle for themselves, and then they go and eat an entire chocolate cake and then compare kind of both experiences. Not that addiction is like eating a chocolate cake, but then some people who then have that slip, it's so shocking to them how they did that. So then you take it back as a teachable learning moment, what led up to this and so forth, and then contracting around that and not normalizing it. Like you can normalize it and say, okay, you know, this happens, I don't recommend it, but then working through that slip. But there also comes a point in time, and it's not up for me to decide, it's what the family members are going to decide where enough is enough. We've gone through 5, 10, 15 slips, and that's where they say enough. And one couple that I have in my practice, she had a slip, and the husband said, you know what, I can work through this, but I'm telling you, this is it. I'm done. I'm absolutely done. And if this happens again, I'm taking the kids, I'm going to sue for custody, and I'm leaving. That's it. Like I have lost everything now. Like I'm just holding on to like a tiny little bit of thread of love for you, and that's it. I can't do this. I've got a responsibility to my children. And then so how they worked through this is that he's the same person who locked up her wedding ring, and she had to earn it back after a certain amount of time. And so what happened is they went on to urine analysis testing. So she goes and does urine analysis testing, so he doesn't have to put all that energy into being a warden or investigator. It's done. They can just concentrate on being a couple, but if that test comes back positive, then there's consequences that fit into place. And that works for them. He took the wedding ring out of the safe. They're just enjoying themselves in their lives together. And they're doing really well. And she said, like, for her, she says it's like a whole grieving process. It's like I wasn't just quite ready to let go. It's like I had to push it to that one kind of final thing. And now she's found this peace inside of her that is, it's incredible. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? So we're done a little bit early, but I'm sure you didn't want to stay here right until 5 with rush hour traffic going wherever you're going. But I enjoyed the afternoon. Thank you very much.